From she whispered, "You're my first," and the Apache swore she'd be his forever. The world had turned to fire and smoke when Clara Monroe ran. The wagon train had been her whole life. 12 families headed west toward the promise of California. Toward a dream her father said was worth the danger, but dreams burned fast. It began with the thunder of hooves and the crack of rifles. Men shouted. Horses screamed. Her mother fell before Clara could even call her name. The last thing she remembered was her father's voice, hoarse, desperate. "Run, Clara!" Run, she did. Now, 3 days later, her once white dress was torn and brown with dust. Her boots were ruined. The desert had swallowed her whole, and the silence pressed on her ears like a weight. When her ankle twisted on a loose rock, she tumbled down a slope into a hidden canyon, an oasis of scrub and shallow water tucked between red cliffs. She crawled to the creek and drank greedily, shaking with thirst. But when she saw her reflection in the rippling surface, she hardly recognized the face staring back, pale, wild-eyed, hair matted with dust and blood. She built a small fire that night, too weak to care who might see it. The cold seeped into her bones and her mind wandered. She thought of her little brother, the one who used to chase fireflies back home in Missouri. He'd been only 9. Had he made it out alive? She pressed her face to her knees and sobbed quietly, afraid even of her own voice echoing in the canyon. The next morning, the pain in her leg had worsened. She tried to stand, but the world spun. Fever had found her. She tore a strip from her petticoat, soaked it in creek water, and pressed it to her forehead. "Don't die," she whispered to herself. Not here. By sunset, the fever dreams came. She heard her father's voice calling her name, saw flashes of fire and smoke. She thought she saw a figure among the rocks, a tall shape moving silently in the distance. Her breath caught. She wasn't sure if it was real. When she woke, she wasn't alone. He stood a few paces away, barefoot, bare-chested, his long dark hair tied with leather, eyes the color of midnight. The sight froze her heart. She'd heard stories about the Apache every settler had, stories meant to frighten children into obedience. But this man wasn't a story. He was real, carved from the land itself. He said nothing, just crouched beside her and held out a small skin of water. She didn't move. He waited, patient as the stone around them. His face was calm, unreadable, but his gaze held no cruelty. At last, her trembling fingers reached for the water. It tasted like life. When she tried to speak, her voice was raw. Why are you helping me?" He didn't seem to understand, but something in her tone made him glance toward the sky. Then back at her, as if to say, "Because I can." He gathered some dried brush, built a steadier fire, and placed a handful of roots beside her. She realized he was offering her food. The gesture, so simple, so human, broke something inside her. For the first time in days, she wasn't completely alone. As darkness settled, he sat a short distance away, sharpening a blade of flint, his movements smooth and unhurried. She watched him, curiosity battling fear. The flames painted his skin gold and copper. He looked young, maybe only a few years older than she was. But there was an old sadness in his eyes. When she closed her eyes that night, she whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for the strange peace that had found her in the heart of the desert. And before sleep claimed her, she heard the faint rustle of his steps drawing closer, the quiet sound of water being poured into a wooden bowl. He was watching over her like a shadow that refused to leave. She did not yet know his name. She did not yet know that this silent warrior, the one who had saved her from death, would one day be the man she loved more fiercely than life itself. But as the moonlight fell across the canyon walls, Clara felt something stir in her chest, something that would outlast the fear, the pain, and even the memory of the world she'd lost, something that would become forever. From she whispered, "You're my first," and the Apache swore she'd be his forever. Clara woke to the sound of water trickling and the faint smell of smoke. For a long moment she lay still, unsure if she was alive or caught in another fever dream. Then she remembered the canyon, the firelight, and the man who had found her. He was still there. The Apache sat cross-legged beside the creek, head bowed, working quietly with his hands. Morning sunlight touched his shoulders, bronzing the lines of his back. He was weaving something from thin strips of leather, focused, steady, unbothered by her staring. When he finally looked up, their eyes met, and Clara's heart lurched. She should have been afraid. Everything she'd ever been told said she should run, scream, hide. Yet she couldn't move. There was no malice in his eyes, no hunger. Just watchfulness, like he was waiting for her to decide whether she would trust him. He pointed toward a small bundle beside the fire. Inside was a piece of cooked rabbit still warm. She hesitated, her fingers shaking. "Eat," he said softly, his accent thick but the word clear. It startled her to hear him speak English at all. She looked up and he nodded once as if to say he meant no harm. Clara's stomach knotted with hunger, but pride made her pause. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why help me?" He didn't answer, just rose silently, walked to the edge of the canyon and scanned the horizon like a hawk on watch. His long hair stirred in the wind. When he turned back, he touched his chest lightly. "Talon," he said. "Talon," she repeated, her voice small in the wide stillness. He pointed at her. "Name?" "Clara," he nodded. "Clara." He said it slowly, as though tasting each syllable. Something about the way he spoke her name, carefully, reverently, made warmth flood her chest. For the rest of the morning he stayed near but didn't crowd her. He mended a leather strap, checked his weapons, moved with quiet precision. She watched him from where she sat by the fire, fascinated by how little he wasted. No word, no motion, no glance. When he walked to the creek to fill a skin with water, his reflection rippled beside hers and she realized how different they were. Pale and freckled, she looked fragile beside the earth-toned strength of him. By afternoon, the pain in her leg eased enough for her to stand. She tried to walk but stumbled, catching herself on a rock. Talon was beside her in an instant, his hand firm on her arm. "I can manage," she said quickly. He didn't let go right away. His grip was gentle but unyielding. His dark eyes studied her, seeing through her stubbornness. Then wordlessly he guided her back to the fire. That evening, as they sat watching the sun dip below the cliffs, she tried to bridge the silence. "Where are you from?" she asked, pointing toward the north. "Your people?" He hesitated. "Far," he said at last. He gestured to the land around them. "This safe. You rest? Are you alone?" she asked softly. He looked away then, jaw tightening. The question had touched something deep. Yes. The single word carried weight. Grief, maybe. Exile. She wanted to ask more, but something in his silence told her not to. As night settled in, Talon built the fire higher. Clara huddled beneath her torn shawl, trembling from the desert chill. When he noticed, he took his own blanket, a rough woven cloth smelling faintly of smoke and pine, and placed it around her shoulders. She started to protest, but he just gave a quiet grunt and stepped back. It was such a small act, yet her throat tightened. No one had cared for her like that since her family's death. For a long while, neither spoke. The fire popped and hissed, and the stars stretched endless above them. Finally, she said, "Thank you." He glanced at her, then to the stars. "No thanks," he murmured. "Just live." Clara watched him. This man who owed her nothing, who had risked everything to save a stranger. She wondered what kind of loneliness had shaped him, what kind of kindness had survived it. And though she didn't understand his words, she began to understand him. That night, as the desert wind whispered through the canyon and her eyelids grew heavy, she realized she no longer felt afraid of him. She felt safe. Clara's strength returned slowly, like dawn creeping over the canyon walls. Each day, Talon found something new to help her heal. Roots that soothed her fever, herbs that numbed her pain, and water from a spring he said was alive. He didn't speak much, but his presence filled the air around her, quiet, steady, protective. When she could finally stand without wobbling, she tried to thank him, though she doubted he understood all her words. "I owe you my life," she said, her voice trembling with sincerity. Talon looked at her blankly, then smiled faintly, just a flicker at the corners of his mouth. "No debt," he said. "You live." But gratitude is a restless thing. Clara wanted to do something for him, to prove she wasn't just a helpless burden. She began tidying the small space where they slept, gathering firewood, cleaning the knife he'd used to skin their meals. Each gesture was small, yet it gave her purpose again. Talon watched her silently, as though amused by her determination. One afternoon, when she tried to carry a heavy log, he stepped forward, took it from her hands, and set it down with ease. She scowled up at him. "You think I can't help?" He didn't answer, only gave her a look that might have been teasing or warning. Then he handed her a smaller bundle of sticks. "These," he said. "You help." Clara laughed for the first time in weeks. It startled her how good it felt. That night after they ate, she sat near the fire brushing out her tangled hair with a small wooden comb she'd carried since childhood. Talon watched her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Your hair, fire." She glanced up surprised. "Fire," he nodded, motioning with his hands. "Red, like fire." Her cheeks warmed. "You're the first to say it kindly." He tilted his head, confused. "Not kind? Back home, folks said it made me look wild," she murmured. "Like I couldn't be tamed." Talon's gaze softened. "Wild is strong." She looked into his eyes and felt something shift inside her, an invisible thread pulling tight. The desert was silent around them, yet the air between them hummed with something alive, unspoken. The next morning, she told him she wanted to leave the canyon, to find the road, to see if any settlers had survived the attack. Talon said nothing for a long while. He stood at the mouth of the canyon, arms crossed, staring at the distant horizon. When he finally turned to her, his face was solemn. "White soldiers come. Bad for you, bad for me. I can't just hide forever," she said softly. "My family are—" Her voice broke. "There might be someone left." Talon's eyes held hers, steady and unreadable. "If you go," he said, "you die." The words landed heavy in her chest. She wanted to argue, but the conviction in his voice silenced her, so she stayed. Days bled into weeks. Together they built a rhythm. He taught her which plants were safe to eat, how to set small traps, how to read the sky for weather. She taught him English words, simple ones at first: fire, water, sky, safe. He repeated them with careful precision, each syllable rolling rough and deep from his throat. One evening, when the clouds swelled purple and the scent of rain filled the air, a storm broke over the canyon. Lightning cracked the sky open, and thunder rolled like distant drums. Talon led her to a small cave high in the rock wall, where they took shelter from the downpour. Inside it was dark except for the occasional flash of light from outside. The sound of rain against the stone was deafening. Clara's heart pounded. Every flash of lightning illuminated Talon's face, calm, composed, the storm reflecting in his eyes. "You fear?" he asked. She swallowed. "A little." He moved closer, his presence a shield against the chill. "Storm go," he said. "Always go." His voice was quiet, reassuring. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The cave was small. She could feel the warmth of his body beside hers. Her pulse raced in that moment. As thunder shook the canyon, she looked at him and realized something that terrified her even more than the storm outside. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid of what she was starting to feel. And when he finally turned his head toward her, his gaze steady and searching, she couldn't look away. The storm raged on. But inside the cave, something far more powerful had begun to stir, something no amount of rain could ever wash away. The days that followed blurred into one long, fevered dream. Clara stayed in the Apache camp, though every instinct told her she didn't belong. She wasn't bound, wasn't treated as a captive, but neither was she free. The women watched her warily, whispering among themselves. Some pitied her, some distrusted her. The children stared openly, curious about her pale skin and golden hair, and Talon, the man who had brought her there, was both her savior and her captor. Each morning, he appeared at her side without a word, leading her to the creek so she could wash or fetch water. When she tried to thank him, he said only, "You live. That is thanks enough." He spoke English roughly but clearly, each word heavy with quiet meaning. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it changed everything. His eyes softened, his face lit like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Clara found herself looking for those smiles. At night, when the campfire flickered and smoke curled into the star-soaked sky, she listened to the Apache songs, haunting, low, full of memories and grief. Sometimes she saw Talon sitting apart from the others, staring into the flames. His scars caught the light, marks of battles fought long before she ever crossed his path. One evening, she dared to sit beside him. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked quietly. He turned his head, studying her. "Different? That there was no war between us. That people could just live." His eyes flickered toward the fire. "White man take my people's land. Burn our homes. Kill women. Tell me how live after that. Clara swallowed hard. I don't know, she whispered. But I wish I did. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not like others? Because I'm lost? She said bitterly. Because you see? The simple truth of his words stunned her. No one had ever said that before, not her father, not her fiancé, not anyone. She blinked back sudden tears. I see too much, maybe. He tilted his head. You see pain, but not run from it. She wanted to tell him that she had run. From her father's death, from the loneliness, from everything that had once defined her. But now, with him, running didn't seem like an option. Over the next days, she learned more about his world, the way the women worked together to grind corn, the men hunted silently at dawn, and how even the smallest child knew which herbs healed and which killed. Life here was raw but whole, bound together by ritual and respect. One morning, while helping an elder woman gather roots, Clara cut her hand on a sharp stone. Blood welled up, and before she could react, Talon appeared, taking her hand in his. He pressed a leaf to the wound, wrapping it in soft cloth. You careless, he murmured, but his touch was gentle. Maybe I'm not built for this life, she said with a shaky smile. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. You stronger than you think. For the first time in a long while, she believed it. That night, she dreamt of two rivers meeting, one dark, one bright, and somehow, they flowed together instead of apart. When she awoke, the camp was quiet. Dawnlight painted everything gold. Talon was sitting a few feet away, sharpening his knife. She watched him for a while, studying the line of his jaw, the strength in his movements, the quiet grace that came from surviving what most could not. You watch me, he said without looking up. She flushed. You make a lot of noise with that knife. He smiled, just barely. You lie. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Maybe I do. For the first time, he reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, rough and warm. You're not prisoner, Clara, he said quietly. You stay because you want. Her breath caught. And if I wanted to go? He lowered his hand slowly. Then I take you to the river. You find your people again, but... He hesitated, voice turning low. If you stay, you find something else. She met his gaze, heart pounding. What? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way he looked at her said it all. In that moment, Clara realized she stood between two worlds, one that had abandoned her and one that was slowly, dangerously, beginning to claim her heart. And for the first time since she'd been lost in the desert, she wasn't sure which world she wanted to belong to. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the air. Wet earth, crushed sage, and the faint hum of thunder far off in the hills. Days melted into one another after that night in the cave, and something between Clara and Talon shifted quietly, like the desert after rain. They no longer spoke only out of necessity. Their silences were no longer sharp with fear, but soft with understanding. Each morning, Talon left before sunrise and returned with something she needed before she knew she needed it. A rabbit for stew, a pouch of wild berries, once even a ribbon of blue cloth he'd found caught on a mesquite branch miles away. For your hair, he said, placing it shyly in her hands. Clara tied it around her braid, heart fluttering. Thank you, she whispered. It's beautiful. He only nodded, but his eyes lingered on her longer than before. That evening, they climbed to the high ridge above their canyon. From there, the desert stretched in every direction, miles of shadowed sand and sage glowing silver under the moonlight. Clara had never seen anything so vast. The stars felt close enough to touch. Talon stood a few feet away, quiet as always, scanning the horizon. He was a silhouette cut from stone, broad shoulders, long hair stirring in the wind. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. Why you look sad? She didn't mean to let the truth slip out, but it came. Because I don't belong anywhere anymore. She hugged her arms around herself. Not with my people. Not out here. Talon turned toward her, the faintest crease between his brows. You belong where your heart live, he said slowly. Here, maybe. She looked at him, searching his face. You think my heart belongs here? He hesitated. Then softly, maybe it belong with me. The words hung between them like a fragile thread of light. Clara's breath caught. Her first instinct was to step back to guard herself, but something deeper, something truer pulled her closer instead. You don't even know me, she whispered. Talon's gaze didn't waver. I know you fight when you weak. I know you cry when no one see. I know you are brave. He paused, his voice deepening. That is knowing. Her throat ached with feeling. For a moment she couldn't speak. The wind tugged at her hair, and the ribbon fluttered free. Talon caught it before it touched the ground. When he straightened, he held something else in his hand, a small leather pouch. He opened it slowly, revealing a turquoise stone, smooth and sky blue, threaded through a cord of sinew. He stepped closer and she could feel the warmth radiating from him even before his fingers brushed her skin. This, he said, his English faltering as he struggled for words. For promise, she frowned slightly. Promise? He nodded. Apache man give to woman he protect. And keep. His eyes held hers. Forever. Her breath trembled. You mean, for life? He didn't answer in words. Instead, he looped the cord gently around her neck. The stone rested against her heartbeat. His fingers lingered there for a moment, tracing the edge of it as though memorizing her. Then in his own tongue, soft, reverent, he spoke a string of words she didn't understand. But she could feel their meaning in her bones. It wasn't just a vow of protection. It was a promise of the soul. When he finished, he pressed his palm lightly to her chest, just above the turquoise, then to his own heart. Now, same, he said quietly. Your heart, my heart. The world seemed to still. Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. Talon, she whispered, I don't deserve this. I've done nothing to... He silenced her with a small shake of his head. You breathe, he said simply. You live. That is enough. The moon shone bright above them, silvering the desert stones. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that faded into the night. But here on the ridge, Clara felt no loneliness, no fear, only the steady rhythm of the man beside her, and the weight of the turquoise stone pulsing softly against her skin. For the first time since her family's death, she felt whole again. And though she didn't yet speak his language, she understood perfectly what he had promised. He would never let her face this world alone again. The days that followed Talon's promise were the gentlest Clara had ever known. They moved through the canyon together like two halves of the same breath, silent, sure belonging. She learned to grind corn with a flat stone, to follow the sound of water underground, to move softly enough that even the rabbits didn't startle. Sometimes, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't name, something between pride and wonder. When she caught his gaze, he would look away quickly, pretending to busy himself with the fire. It was peace. Fragile, stolen, beautiful. And then one morning it shattered. They were gathering wood along the canyon's edge when Clara heard it first, a faint clinking sound like metal striking metal. Talon froze instantly, head tilting. His body went rigid, every sense awake. Horse, he murmured. Many. Her heart seized. Settlers. He didn't answer. His hand closed gently but firmly around her wrist, guiding her down behind a cluster of rocks. From there, she could see the narrow trail leading into the canyon's mouth. A line of dust rose against the pale sky. Moments later they appeared. U.S. cavalrymen, maybe 10 of them, riding hard, rifles slung over their shoulders. The sunlight glinted off their brass buttons and bayonets. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. They'll see the fire pit, she whispered. Talon, we have to hide. He nodded once, pulling her deeper into the rocks. But the canyon betrayed them. A startled crow burst from a nearby tree, its wings beating wildly. One of the soldiers looked up, pointing. There! Gunfire split the morning air. Clara screamed as bullets cracked the stone above them. Talon shoved her flat against the ground, covering her with his body. The scent of dust and gunpowder filled her lungs. Then she heard the deep thud of boots, soldiers dismounting, shouting orders. Hold your fire! It's a woman, looks like she's being held. Hands grabbed her arms, yanking her upright. She cried out as Talon lunged toward them, but a rifle butt smashed against his head, dropping him to his knees. Stop! Don't hurt him! Clara cried. He saved me. Her words fell on deaf ears. The sergeant, a grizzled man with sunburned cheeks, grabbed her chin, forcing her to look up. You all right, miss? Did this redskin take you? Where's your people? Clara shook her head violently. You don't understand. He found me. He's not the enemy. But the sergeant had already turned away, motioning to 2 soldiers. Tie him up. We'll take him back to camp for questioning. Talon, Clara screamed, struggling against the soldier holding her. Please, stop. He didn't hurt me. Blood ran down the side of Talon's face, but his eyes stayed on hers. Steady, unflinching, full of something deeper than pain. When one of the soldiers bound his wrists, he didn't fight. His gaze told her not to move, not to risk herself, but she couldn't obey. "Listen to me," Clara shouted at the sergeant, voice raw with desperation. "If you hang him, you'll be killing the only good man left in this cursed land." The sergeant frowned, hesitating for a moment.
"He's Apache, miss."
"They don't save white women, they take 'em. That's a lie." She spat. "He saved my life. He protected me." Her words echoed against the canyon walls, wild and trembling. For a moment the soldiers faltered, uncertain. But when Talon lifted his head, the movement, simple, proud, ignited their suspicion again. The sergeant's jaw hardened. "Enough. We'll let the major sort this out." They dragged Talon toward the horses. Clara fought free of the man restraining her and ran after them, nearly tripping in the dust. "If you hurt him, I'll never forgive you." The sergeant turned sharply. "You're in shock, miss. You'll thank us later." Talon was shoved to his knees beside the horses. His hands were tied, his mouth bleeding, but when Clara reached for him, he managed to whisper one word. "Horse urgent. Run." She shook her head, tears streaking her face. "Not without you." But before she could speak again, one of the soldiers struck her across the shoulder, sending her sprawling. The world blurred into dust and shouting. Then she heard another sound, the sharp guttural cry that ripped from Talon's throat as he broke his bindings and lunged. The soldiers shouted, rifles firing, chaos exploding all at once, and through it all, Clara's scream cut through the gunfire. "Talon!" The world dissolved into gunfire, dust, and shouting. Clara couldn't tell where the bullets came from or how many soldiers fired. Only the Talon was still standing, bleeding, unarmed, and defying every man in that canyon. "Hold him down." The sergeant bellowed, reloading his rifle, but Talon moved like lightning. He swung the broken rope still tied around his wrist, slamming it into the nearest soldier's face. The man staggered back, cursing, and Talon seized his chance, grabbing the man's revolver and firing once, a warning shot that cracked through the air. Clara scrambled to her feet, dizzy with panic. A bullet whistled past her shoulder, striking the rock wall. "Talon!" she screamed, reaching for him. He turned, eyes blazing with urgency. "Run!" But she didn't move fast enough. A soldier lunged at her from behind, catching her arm. Before he could pull her away, Talon was there, grabbing the man by the throat and hurling him backward with such force that he hit the ground and didn't rise again. Talon caught Clara by the waist, his breath hot and ragged. "Come!" He dragged her toward the horses tethered nearby. Clara stumbled, clutching his arm. One of the soldiers fired, grazing Talon's shoulder. He didn't flinch, just vaulted onto a horse and hauled her up behind him. "Hold tight," he shouted. The horse reared, terrified by the chaos, then bolted down the canyon path. Gunfire erupted behind them, sparks flying from the rocks. Clara buried her face against Talon's back, clutching him as the wind tore through her hair. The canyon walls narrowed, echoing with the pounding of hooves. Talon guided the horse with effortless control, dodging boulders and sharp bends, his movements sharp and sure even through the pain. After what felt like forever, the gunfire faded into the distance. The canyon opened onto a wide stretch of desert, bathed in the dying light of sunset. Talon urged the horse onward until it stumbled from exhaustion. Only then did he slow. They dismounted near a cluster of rocks. Clara's legs gave out beneath her. She fell to her knees, chest heaving, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Talon swayed beside her, clutching his shoulder. Blood trickled down his arm, staining the leather of his vest. "Oh God, you're hurt," she gasped, crawling toward him. "Sit down, let me see." He shook his head weakly. "No, stop." "They come. Talon, you'll bleed out if—" His hand caught hers, firm and trembling. "You live first. I live after." Tears welled in her eyes. "Don't you dare talk like that." He tried to smile, but it faltered under pain. "You strong now. You run if I fall." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. "Not ever." For a moment their eyes locked, hers full of fear and defiance, his dark and steady despite the blood streaking his cheek. Then he nodded once. "We find safe." Together they led the weary horse deeper into the desert until they found a narrow ravine, hidden among twisted mesquite trees. The shadows grew long and cool. Talon sank to his knees, breathing hard. Clara tore a strip from her dress, pressed it to his wound, and whispered prayers she barely remembered from childhood. He winced but didn't pull away. His hand brushed her arm, his fingers tracing her wrist lightly. "You brave," he murmured. She looked up, blinking back tears. I only did what you'd do for me. The sky above them turned deep violet, stars blooming one by one. The desert air cooled, but Clara's hands trembled with heat from his skin. She leaned closer, pressing the cloth tighter against his shoulder. You saved me again, she whispered. He gave a low laugh, rough and broken. Maybe you save me now. When his eyes closed, she panicked, shaking him. No, Talon, stay awake. I stay, he breathed. You my heart, Clara, I stay. The words stole her breath. Her hand lingered against his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Then rest, she said softly. I'll keep watch. And through the long night she did. Each sound, the cry of a coyote, the whisper of wind, made her pulse jump, but she never left his side. When dawn finally came, streaking the horizon in rose and gold, Talon stirred and opened his eyes. He looked at her the way a man looks at the sun after a long, dark winter, like it's something he'll never take for granted again. They were hunted, wounded and alone in the vast wilderness, but they were together, and for Clara, that was enough. When morning came, the desert was quiet again, so quiet it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. The soldiers were gone, their tracks lost in the sands. Clara and Talon had survived, but the cost hung heavy in the air like smoke after a fire. Talon's wound had stopped bleeding, though the pain still etched deep lines into his face. Clara tore more fabric from her skirt, cleaning it carefully with water from a nearby spring. He barely flinched, but when her fingers brushed his skin, his breath caught, and for a heartbeat they both froze. Sorry, she whispered. He shook his head. No sorry. His voice was rough, soft. You heal me, she smiled faintly. You've done enough healing for both of us. They stayed hidden in the ravine for 3 days, moving only at night. The days were hot, the nights cold, and food was scarce. Yet Clara had never felt such peace, not since her family died. Here, under the endless stars, there were no soldiers, no wagons, no boundaries between them, only two hearts that had already chosen each other, though neither had dared to speak it aloud. One night, after she'd finished tending the fire, she noticed Talon watching her from across the small camp. The flames danced between them, gold and red, throwing long shadows across his face. What is it? She asked, half smiling. He tilted his head. You different now. How so? Not afraid. Clara laughed softly, the sound echoing against the canyon walls. I guess I got tired of being scared. He rose slowly, crossing the space between them. When he stopped in front of her, she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His nearness was a force all its own, quiet, magnetic, pulling her toward him. You brave, he said again, his voice low. Braver than most men I know. She swallowed, her heartbeat quickening. And you, she began, but her voice faltered. He waited, patient, his eyes searching hers. You make me feel safe, she finally said. Even when the world feels like it's burning down. Something flickered in his gaze. Pain, tenderness, longing. He lifted a hand, hesitating only a moment before brushing his thumb along her cheek. Her skin tingled beneath his touch. Clara, he murmured, her name softer than the night wind. She didn't pull away. Couldn't. The space between them disappeared, and when he kissed her, it was like the first breath after drowning. Gentle at first, careful, questioning, then deeper, until the fire inside her rose to meet his. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, both of them trembling. You sure? He whispered. Her answer was barely a breath. Yes. They lay together beneath the open sky, the stars their witnesses. The desert breeze carried the scent of sage and smoke, and the world seemed to pause, holding them in its palm. In his arms, Clara felt everything she thought she'd lost: warmth, trust, belonging. Afterward, she traced the scar on his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. Does it hurt? She asked softly. He smiled faintly, eyes closed. Only when you leave. She pressed her lips to the wound, then to his heart. Then I won't. He turned his head toward her, his voice rough with emotion. You mine, Clara, not as slave, not as prize. As soul, tears welled in her eyes. And you're mine, she whispered. Not as protector. As home. For a long time neither spoke. The fire burned low, painting their faces in amber light. Somewhere far off a coyote howled, but even that lonely cry sounded softer tonight. When sleep finally claimed them, Clara dreamed of peace, not the kind promised by preachers or soldiers, but the kind that grew quietly between two people who had survived too much to take love lightly. And when she woke, She found Talon already awake watching the horizon. "Where will we go now?" she asked, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. He pointed toward the east. "Mountains. No white soldiers. No war. You think we'll be safe there?" He turned to her, eyes steady. "With you, I safe anywhere." She smiled through the ache in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward something, toward a life they'd build together, far from hatred and pain. As the sun rose over the desert, Clara reached for his hand. He laced his fingers through hers, and together they walked east. Their footprints the only trace left of the girl who had been lost and the man who had found her. In exile, they had discovered something greater than survival. They had found love. The sun had barely risen when the sound of hooves shattered the calm. Clara froze mid-step, the skin on the back of her neck prickling. Talon's hand went instantly to his knife. He listened, every muscle in his body tense. The sound came from the north, slow at first, then faster. Soldiers, they'd found them. Talon grabbed her hand. "Run," Clara didn't argue. Together they darted into the mesquite thicket, crouching low as the horses thundered past the ridge above them. Dust drifted down through the branches. She clutched Talon's arm, her heart racing. "How did they—" she began. "Tracks," he whispered. "Always tracks." They stayed still, barely breathing. But one of the soldiers, a scout with sharp eyes, spotted something, the horse they'd tethered near the creek. He shouted, and within seconds gunfire split the air. Talon yanked Clara down, covering her with his body as bullets ripped through the brush. "Stay," he hissed. Before she could stop him, he was gone, moving through the trees like a shadow. Clara's fear turned to fury. She crawled after him, keeping low, branches scratching her arms. Through the haze of dust, she saw him ambush the lead soldier, striking him down with the butt of his rifle. But there were too many. 4 soldiers circled around, cutting him off from escape. Talon swung and fought, but a rifle stock caught his jaw, sending him to the ground. Clara screamed, "Stop!" she cried, running into the open. "Please stop!" A sergeant turned, gun trained on her. "Step away from that savage, ma'am. You don't know what he's done." "I know exactly what he's done," she said, voice shaking. "He saved me." The sergeant hesitated, eyes narrowing. "You've been taken in. He's an Apache outlaw. A killer." Talon struggled to rise, blood dripping from his lip. "No killer," he spat. "I defend my people. You murdered soldiers. They murdered women, children, burned my home." The tension was thick enough to choke on. Clara moved between them, her skirts torn and dirty, her face streaked with tears. "If you kill him," she said, "you'll have to kill me too." The sergeant's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, miss." "No," she said, standing tall despite the trembling in her hands. "The mistake is thinking a man's worth less because he was born on the wrong side of a river." The soldiers shifted uneasily. They weren't used to women defying them, least of all one who spoke with such fire. Talon's eyes met hers, dark, steady, full of silent gratitude. He whispered her name, Clara, like a prayer. The sergeant raised his gun again. "Step aside." Clara didn't move. "I love him," she said. The words burst out before she could think, raw and trembling. "He's my heart, my home. If you shoot, you'll have to go through me." The world seemed to stop. Even the desert wind went still. The sergeant's face hardened, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Finally, he lowered the gun slightly. "You're a fool," he muttered. "Both of you." He motioned to his men. "We'll report this. Command will decide what happens next." When the soldiers rode off, Talon collapsed to his knees. Clara rushed to him, her arms wrapping around his shoulders. "They'll come back," he said, his breath ragged. "Next time they bring more. Then we'll go farther," she said. "Beyond their maps. Beyond their reach." He looked up at her, eyes heavy with sorrow. "You sure?" "You leave your people, your world." She cupped his face, her thumb brushing the blood from his cheek. "My world's with you now." He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then I choose you, Clara. Against all things. And I choose you," she whispered back. They buried their tracks, gathered what they could carry, and turned toward the mountains. Behind them, the smoke of army campfires blurred the horizon. Ahead, the land stretched wild and untamed, waiting for them. As they rode side by side, the wind caught her hair and tangled it with his. Neither spoke because words would only cheapen what they'd already said in 100 ways. Through every risk, Every touch, every vow made beneath the open sky. Talon glanced at her once, and she smiled. A smile that told him she'd follow him anywhere. And somewhere deep in his chest, the warrior who had once known only battle found peace in the simple truth that love, too, could be a kind of freedom. They rode until the land changed, until the harsh desert gave way to canyons of red stone and narrow valleys where wildflowers bloomed between the rocks. The air grew cooler, fresher, and the silence was no longer heavy but alive, filled with birdsong and the distant rush of a hidden stream. Here, at last, they stopped. Talon helped Clara down from the horse. She stumbled, her legs trembling from exhaustion. But when her feet touched the earth, she felt something sacred in it, something still and eternal. "This is where we stay," Talon said softly. She looked around. "It's beautiful," he nodded. "My mother's people once camped here. A place of peace. No war touches this land." And so, among the red cliffs and whispering pines, they began to build a new life. Each morning, Clara gathered water and tended a small fire. She learned to set snares, to grind corn Talon had carried in a pouch from his village. At night, he told her the names of stars, the Apache names, rich and poetic. He told her of spirits that guarded the wind, of ancestors who walked unseen through the canyons. "Do you believe they still watch you?" she asked one night, their hands entwined. He smiled faintly. "I believe they watch us. Maybe they whisper." He finally found what he fought for. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "And what was that?" He kissed her hair. "Peace." For the first time in years, Clara knew what peace felt like, too. It wasn't the absence of danger. It was waking beside him each morning, his breath warm against her neck, knowing that no one owned her fate anymore. Weeks passed. Then months. The seasons shifted, painting the canyon in gold and amber. Their little shelter of stone and pine grew stronger. They hunted. They laughed. They built a garden in a patch of sunlight. When it rained, they danced barefoot in the mud until they were breathless. And at night, when she lay with her head on his shoulder, the stars whispered secrets only lovers could hear. But peace is fragile. One evening, a distant echo broke the quiet, a gunshot. Then another. Talon's head snapped up. "Soldiers," he said, eyes narrowing. "They find trail." Fear twisted Clara's stomach. "Then we have to go." He shook his head slowly. "No more running." He stood, gripping his rifle. "If I run again, I live like ghost." "Up, man." "Talon, please," she whispered, grabbing his hand. "We can find another place." He looked down at her, his expression torn between love and duty. "You stay hidden. If they come, you run east, promise." "I won't leave you," she said fiercely. "Not after everything." He brushed her cheek, his touch trembling. "You already saved me once. If I fall, you live. That's how you keep saving me." Before she could answer, the gunfire grew louder. Horses' cries echoed through the canyon. Talon kissed her, hard, desperate, final, and then was gone, vanishing into the red stone shadows like a spirit. Clara hid behind a ridge, her heart pounding. The fight was short but brutal. She heard shouting, then silence. When she finally dared to move, the world had gone still again. Too still. She found him lying by the creek, blood staining the earth around him. "Talon," she cried, dropping to her knees. He looked up at her, a faint smile on his lips. "No tears," he murmured. "I go where no man hunts, where no war finds." She pressed her hands against the wound, sobbing. "You can't leave me." He lifted a trembling hand, touching her face. "You strong now. You carry both hearts, mine and yours. Talon, please." His eyes softened, the faintest light still in them. "I keep my word," he whispered. "You mine forever." And then the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and the low, mournful cry of the canyon. His hand fell still in hers. Clara stayed there long after the sun disappeared, until the stars came out one by one. She buried him where the pines met the water, marking the place with smooth stones. When the wind moved through the canyon, it sounded like a whisper, a voice she would know anywhere. "You mine forever." Years later, travelers spoke of a woman who lived alone in the Red Canyons, tending a small garden and watching the stars each night. Some said she was mad, others said she was waiting. But those who came close enough to hear her speak swore that when the wind blew through the cliffs, she smiled and whispered back, as though answering someone unseen. And maybe she was. Because love like theirs doesn't end, it only changes shape. It lingers in the dust, in the river, in the canyon wind that still carries his vow across the desert. "You're my first," she'd once whispered. And forever after, the wind seemed to answer, "And you were my last."